When I was a junior in college, I lived in a fraternity house with 40 plus other guys. As you can imagine, getting any personal time for studying, relaxing, or just peace and quiet was beyond rare. That December, before Christmas break, one of my friends suggested we drive a few hours north of where we were in Michigan to their family's cottage, where we could all just unwind before final exams and the much-needed winter break. As we drove up to the cottage, it was picturesque. Snow softly falling, beautiful trees surrounding the property, a frozen lake illuminated by the cottage exterior lights. It was just what we needed. Think of a Thomas Kinsade painting. As cliched as it sounds, his family had been coming up to this lake for years, and only recently, within the past 5 years or so, purchased this place from an elderly couple that had passed and had lived there their entire lives. Throughout his childhood, they would always pass by this house and remark that it was haunted, since the folks that lived there were retired and they weren't as active as the other lake dwellers, and being that their home sat a little further off the water and was canopied by trees, it always seemed to be in the shadows and never in the sun, which gave it that additional spooky look and feel. When the couple did ultimately pass, his family purchased it with the intention of building a more modern lake house in its stead. But I digress. So we pulled into the driveway and tugged up the walkway through 6 inches of soft, powdery snow. Once we got inside, we immediately started to unload our groceries and began the dinner process, of which I was in charge. The place was cozy, warm, and something you'd expect an older person's home to look and feel like. A fire was lit warming the place, and I had just started cooking some steaks and shrimp in the kitchen. As a college kid, you can imagine the excitement and luxury we felt when we opened their freezer and saw it was stocked with steaks, shrimp, and chicken. We had been living off mac and cheese, so this was something we were even more excited about. We had just mixed a drink, the fire was warm, and the radio was on. We couldn't have been happier. To set the scene and layout of the property, the house was sitting at about 50 yards from the water and on a slight hill. The nearest neighbor was over half a mile away, and the drive up was about 300 yards from the road, so we were nestled back in relative isolation. There had also been a steady snowfall that evening, so there was about 6 to 8 inches of snow surrounding the house and covering the deck. So if, let's say, a squirrel had walked up to the house, its tracks would have been easily seen as the exterior lights illuminated the entire exterior. Even sensor lights were installed among the side walkway. We felt as safe as one could be. It was nearing 9 p.m, and we were starting to really feel it unwind. We poured another drink, and the food was nearly done. The smell of cooked steak wafted through the house. We all had these smiles on our faces, knowing we were living the life while the other guys back at school were living on top of each other and dealing with the nightly chaos only a gaggle of college boys living under one roof can create. The juxtaposition was stark, and we couldn't have been happier. Dinner was nearing being finished, and the police, every little thing she does is magic, was on the radio. This was 1994, so there was no iPod or anything. We were old school, and tuned into the local radio station. The days when you felt that extra connection when the station played a song you really liked, like you and the DJ were on the same page with what good music is. We were feeling it right when the song was feeling it too. We cranked the volume and started dancing around, and life couldn't be any better. A nice buzz, a great meal on the way, and a cozy, tucked away cabin. Holidays right around the corner, a roaring fire. And as a young man who grew up modestly, it was one of those moments. As we cranked the music up, or say pretty loud, we heard the 3 loudest knocks on the back door. That stopped us, and the police probably, in our tracks. It was so obvious someone was at the back door. We all just stared at each other with a scared, confused look. Who in their right mind was out on a winter night and at our door? Who could we possibly be disturbing? A chill ran through me immediately, because no matter who was at the door, it wasn't a good thing. My friend, whose family owned the place, ran to the back door and came roaring back with a look of sheer terror on his face and said, "Someone's in the house." The back door was slightly open, and someone had slipped in the house. I can't describe the fear that gripped me. We panicked and froze. What should we do? Grab the fire poker, a kitchen knife? What was this person's intention? What were they armed with? Why had they knocked and announced their presence only to slip into a hiding place? I can't stress how loud the knock on the door was. It wasn't one of those, "Did you hear that?" moments. It was a needle off the record moment, when you all arrive at the same thought at the same time and realize something bad is about to happen. We all caught our breath and did a room-to-room search, armed with household items. By the time we got back to the main room with the fireplace, we glanced outside to see where the tracks were in the snow, expecting to see snow prints from the road, or heaven forbids the wood. But we were stunned to find the snow was undisturbed. The back deck, with the door was slightly open, showed no signs of anyone having walked up. The steps on the deck itself, the walkway leading up to where we were all covered with 6 to 8 inches of fresh snow. No one had approached the house from any direction. What the hell was going on here? Whatever it was, there was no other person in the house. We were stuck in a cabin with something that was very upset about us disturbing them. We all quickly surmised that the old couple had once lived here and wasn't happy about their nightly routine being replaced with loud music and dancing kids, but this insight offered us little comfort. After we finished dinner, we all slept in the master bedroom on the same bed. The idea of being alone and disturbed by whatever was too frightening. The night came and went without incident, almost as if the ghost had made it its point and was snug in knowing how much we were afraid. In the morning, we packed up and drove out of there in a hurried manner. In the daylight, we all looked back at the snow surrounding the house. It was as pristine as the night before. Not a flake seemed out of place. I'll never forget those 3 knocks. I would like to start by saying this. Before I moved to this house in Oregon, I did not truly believe in the paranormal. I just thought of ghost stories as entertainment. But now, I'm a believer. In 2018, I moved to Central Oregon. I moved into the attic of a house that was built around 1840. I was a broke college student, and it was a great deal on the rent. The other girls who lived in the house warned me that strange things happened, but I brushed it off. In the beginning, it was small things like the second-story balcony door being wide open in the mornings, but still deadbolt locked. Chairs from the first floor appearing on the second floor. I just thought it was my roommates messing with each other. Then came Thanksgiving. I'm the only one out of the 12 roommates to stay home for the holidays. I woke up and the house was freezing, so I padded downstairs to turn up the thermostat. As I'm pressing the buttons, I hear 2 women talking. I stop pressing the buttons to listen to see who's home, and I hear one of them say, "He's coming," and I immediately forget everything else they said. I wandered around the house, trying to find who's home, but there's no one. It's just me. I spend the rest of the day trying to shake it off. It must have been from how exhausted I was. That night I'm sitting on the couch in the living room with my roommate's kitten in my lap petting her. All of a sudden, she goes rigid in my lap, and I look up to see a shadow on the window. Inky black, like it was there on the glass and not a reflection or someone outside. I stare at it for a moment, and feel it looking back at me. Then it moves across the glass and disappears. I call my friend, the one who's still in town, and she comes over. After this, stranger things start happening. When I go into the basement, I feel eyes on me. One night, my roommate sees a man in what we call the catacombs, a weird zigzag hallway that leads from the main basement to the basement apartment. She calls the police, but they can't find anyone. In the attic, my bed is in a triangle-shaped room, and at night, it sounds like someone is dragging their fingernails down it above my head. Things go missing in the house. All the fish in my roommate's fish tank suddenly die one night. I hear whispers all over the house, unable to pick up what they're saying. One day my roommates went into the room through a window that doesn't lock and could not go back inside as the window got stuck. They were trapped out there for hours until I came home and heard them yelling. I opened it easily and couldn't understand how they were stuck. Once the lease ended, we all moved out. I swore to never go back, but I often feel drawn to the house. If I'm out walking, I'll just stand outside of it and stare into the window of what used to be my bedroom. This happened in Ciudad Lerdo, Durango, Mexico, during Christmas vacation in 2006. My family had gathered there in big numbers for the holidays, and when you have that many cousins together, boredom can lead to adventure. Someone suggested a ghost hunt, and since my family has a long and complicated history with the paranormal, everyone agreed without hesitation. We took 2 pictures that night that became the center of long-lasting discussions. The first picture showed the front gate of one of my aunt's houses. Floating near the top corner of the gate appeared to be a pale orb, not the kind people dismiss as dust or a light flare. This one specifically seemed to have a face. Inside the orb, the air around it looked darker, forming what resembled wispy, long hair, and in the center was unmistakably the shape of a nose. Everyone stared at it for a long time, debating what exactly we had captured. The second photo was taken across town, at a massive house we always called the castle. It wasn't really a castle, just a sprawling, imposing property that had been fought over by 2 parties years ago. The dispute didn't end well, and the place had collected a heavy energy since. In the photo, a bright glow shined from one of the windows. At first glance, it resembled a pair of giant eyes staring out, too large for a cat, and too bright to have been visible to the naked eye. A few relatives said they could even see the faint outline of a child near the house. We joked nervously about ghosts in windows and faces trapped in orbs, but there was something genuinely unsettling beneath the laughter. My aunt still owns the house from the orb photo. Then over the years, that home developed a reputation none of us could ignore. Her children, my cousins, used to play with a Ouija board there, something the adults continuously warned them against. Every renter who lived there later described misfortune, as if the house cursed them. Breakups, severe illness, financial ruin, emotional deterioration that only stopped once they moved out. The house didn't ruin people suddenly. It drained them slowly, like their soul was being slowly sapped away. I remember visiting as a child and feeling like someone always stood just behind me, and no room ever felt truly empty. Their staircase, especially, carried a presence, as though something watched from the landing, waiting to descend if you dared to stay too long. I had nightmares whenever I slept there, long before I knew of any of these stories. Nearly every family member on that side has experienced something. People heard footsteps on the second-story tiles, heavy enough to make them move, even when no one was up there. Loud bootsteps could be heard walking down the stairs. Children would speak or play with invisible people. My cousin insisted he had a friend in that house, one that adults could not see. The story that haunted me the most came from a renter, or maybe a relative, depending who recalled it. One night, after returning from a family outing, they reached the house's steel front door. They unlocked it like usual. The deadbolt slid back, but when the father tried pushing it open, the door refused to move. He shoved harder, and it felt like something on the other side was pushing back. A few more adults tried to help him, leaning with full strength, but the door barely budged. Frustrated and confused, the father finally gave up and turned to call a locksmith. The moment he lifted his hand from the handle, the door swung open smoothly on its own, as if nothing had ever blocked it, as if whatever was behind it simply stepped aside. Years passed and the stories only multiplied. Then my mum told me something that chilled me far worse than any picture. Sometime between 2007 and 10, one of my uncles began suffering from deep grief over their mother's death. A medium was called to cleanse the house. My mum, several siblings, and my aunt gathered that afternoon, clutching prayer books and rosaries ready to fight for peace in that place. But the moment they began, strange things erupted. Behind the garage area is a passage leading to a small 2-story guest house. That yard is surrounded by a tall concrete wall. No wind ever reaches inside. Yet during the cleansing, a violent gust swirled through out of nowhere, snuffing out every candle placed there. Inside, there was a huge sanctified candle that was lit to protect them, and it burnt down to almost nothing in an hour, when it should have lasted for days. The medium warned everyone not to stop praying no matter what they heard or saw, except none of them could get more than a few words out. My mother said it felt like their tongues twisted against their will. Words evaporated from memory the instant they tried to speak them. The medium then spoke. My mum and others exchanged terrified glances. The woman's voice was no longer hers, but it sounded like the voice of their deceased mother. The medium stared at one of the grieving brothers in particular and said, in a tired, almost pleading tone, "Please, let me rest now. I'm fine now. A trial is coming for the family, and you must stay together through it." Was it truly my grandmother reaching out, or something darker, imitating her? They never received a clear answer. That uncle passed away first among those present. Another sister died a year or so later. No one knows whether the warning was real or manipulation, only that the message lingered like a half-fulfilled prophecy. One thing every witness agrees on, though, is that many entities live in that house, none of them kind. The darkness doesn't wish to be cleansed. Looking back at that night in 2006, wandering the town with cameras and naivety, we thought we were hunting ghosts, but I guess in a way, they were hunting us. We lived in this house for a little over 2 years, until now. Nothing strange ever happened. There were no cold spots, no flickering lights, and we never heard any mysterious footsteps. It was just an ordinary home with 2 hungry cats. Everything changed one night, though, while I was feeding said cats. One bowl sits tucked just around the corner of the hall, and the other just out enough that I can barely see down the corridor while filling it. My cats never ignore feeding time. They'd shove the devil himself to get to their food. I poured food into the second bowl, expecting my cat to practically dive in, But that's when I heard a sort of slapping sound, not paw sounds, or something falling. The noise was like bare hands hitting hardwood floor fast and rhythmically. My head snapped up, just in time to see a flesh-colored shape slide out of sight, retreating down the hallway. I don't know how to describe it, but it looked disturbing. I would have immediately blamed exhaustion or my imagination, except for one unsettling detail. The cat at my feet didn't touch her food. She stared with huge, terrified eyes in the same direction as the sound. Her hair puffed up. She stayed frozen like she thought moving would get her noticed. I tried brushing it off as sleep deprivation, but the moment stayed stuck in the back of my mind like a splinter you can't dig out. Then came Saturday. I had just gotten home from work, and my partner and I were relaxing in the upstairs den. Both cats were lazing in the room with us, and everything felt normal. Then the pounding began. It sounded like someone sprinting on the floor above us. We do have neighbors, so I told myself they were probably just running up and down the stairs. But the footsteps did seem exceptionally close, almost like they were inside our house. Before I could finish convincing myself, it appeared. The same flesh-like mass shot across the doorway in a blur of movement. This time I saw it clearly enough to know what I wasn't seeing. No eyes, no ears, no nose, no mouth, no hair. Just a smooth, human-shaped thing made entirely of skin. Like someone erased its body features, but it kept running anyway. My cats reacted first. Their tails puffed out. They yowled, then bolted like something was hunting them. My partner's face went pale. She'd seen it too. She heard the footsteps. This wasn't just in my head. The thing looked like it ran into the next room, so instinct told me to check. I thought maybe, somehow, this was an intruder with a mask or suit. A horrible prank. Something rational. But the room was empty. No bed skirt to hide under, no closet, no attic access, nothing. Just an ordinary bedroom. Now I love paranormal mysteries. Normally this is the kind of situation I document obsessively, research into early in the morning, and try communicating with whatever dares to lurk. Except this didn't feel curious or neutral. It felt angry. Both times I'd encountered it, the feeling in my chest twisted like something sharp. Half of me wants to set up cameras and try and catch this creature again. The other half agrees with my partner, who insists it's not a ghost, but something far spookier. She wants me to ignore it, pretend we never saw it, and that our house isn't harboring something unnatural. Part of me wonders why it came back after the first time I shrugged it off. Talking about this already feels dangerous. What do you all think? The weirdest thing that ever happened to me went down about 6 years ago. My two roommates and I were renting a narrow, canal-side row house in a coastal town. One roommate, called Marco, liked to say he carried weirdness with him. He told stories about lights and knocks following him since childhood. He treated it like a personality trait almost. The other roommate, Lee, kept to herself and worked nights at a seafood market. I believed in ghosts the way you believe in a creaky floorboard, plausible and not something you really think about. One night, though, it got serious. I came home earlier than usual. There was some odd feeling within the house. Leah wasn't home. Her shift sometimes ran late, and Marco's car was in the drive. The front parlor light was off, the curtains drawn, but the TV in the back room was flickering with no sound. I shrugged it off, dropped my bag, and went to get a beer. I got 3 sips in on the back stoop when I heard a child laugh, high and thin, like someone trying to laugh for the first time. It came from above the dining room, which made no sense because we didn't have kids and there was no house upstairs. I froze. Marco was known for pranks, maybe he was messing with me, but when I stepped inside the hallway, the laughter stopped. That should have been odd enough, but it wasn't. I went inside, and the living room felt colder than the rest of the house. A sharp pocket of cold that sat like a hand on my chest. The air smelled faintly of lemon and dust. Marco burned citronella candles when he couldn't sleep. I told myself it was the open canal window down by the hall and that I was being dramatic. I settled into the armchair facing the hallway. The chair is set that your back faces the corridor leading to the tiny dining room nook. Halfway through a sitcom, I had the impression someone was kneeling at the doorway watching me. Then, like the flip of a switch, the hair on the back of my neck prickled, and I felt cold air move across my shoulder like a small breath. I spun, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty. I checked every room, opened every closet. There was no open window. No vents angled towards the chair. The old radiator clunked awake in time with my heartbeat, and I told myself Marco must be hiding in the attic, or Leah had come home and slipped out. I left the light on and sat with my back to the wall, blanket pulled up to my chin, and watched the TV until the static noise felt safe. That is the moment I can point to, the breath on my neck that was not a draft. Everything else fit around it like a puzzle piece. Before the breath, there had been smaller things. One morning I found a child's crayon drawing pinned to the fridge. 2 stick fingers, one with wild hair and the other reaching towards the door. None of us had kids, let alone owned crayons. We assumed a neighbor's kid must have left it. I appreciate that sounds insane. Then some mornings there would be wet footprints on the back hallway rug. Tiny half-moon prints, like someone had stepped barefoot in water and padded through. The footprints stopped at the doorway to my bedroom and didn't continue. Marco laughed it off and taped another of his conspiracy memes over the fridge art. There were other jokes or tricks that grew stranger. A glass on the kitchen counter would rattle in the middle of the afternoon while the house was empty. Once I heard a cheap tin bell, the sort you tie on a cat, ring twice in the attic at 3 a.m. When I got up to look, there was nothing but a single small feather lying on the attic hatch. Marco found it and pocketed it and put it on his dresser like a trophy. Marco insisted it was playful. He liked the idea of a mischievous presence, a childlike thing that made noises and moved small things. He'd sit on the stoop at night and smoke, claiming the house felt warm in a way you imagine a child smile. But the night of the breath, after I checked every room and turned on every light, I caught movement in the hallway mirror. A shadow that didn't match anything in the room. It moved independently, as if the reflection had its own will. I called out and heard the child's laughter again. Then I felt something slide past my shoulder. We never discovered the cause. The female roommate moved out a month later for a job in town with fewer creaks. Marco stopped joking about being a magnet for weirdness, and we started keeping guest lights on at night. Sometimes when it's late, and I'm alone in a different apartment that doesn't creak like the row house, I'll still get a tiny lightning bolt prickling at the base of my skull, at the exact same spot where the breath hit me years ago. I never saw a face, or anyone fully, and I'm grateful for that. I never want to live in a haunted place again. I lived with 4 other roommates several years ago. The landlord also lived in the home. He refused to do long-term leases and required all potential renters to spend a few nights in the house before moving in. I met the landlord through a co-worker, as her boyfriend was one of the renters. Her stories of the activity in the house were what intrigued me most. To be honest, that, and the rent was half of what it should have been. Unusual activity was occurring throughout the house. Items were being dragged and dropped, and scratches and knocking sounds came from all parts of the house, even outside, though they were mainly concentrated in a specific hallway, the attic and the living room. Walking into rooms where objects had been thrown around or knocked over often revealed items moved from counters to other locations, drawers or cabinets left open, and pictures flipped upside down. Electrical issues also occurred, including complete power loss, flickering lights, and malfunctions with appliances or televisions. Most of these incidents happened at night, with the highest frequency occurring after midnight, although some events took place during the day too. In some cases, items were witnessed falling from shelves or cabinets when no one else was home, and no one had been near or around the objects at the time they fell or moved. The landlord once saw the woman he had brought the house from standing in the hallway. No one else saw her, but we all experienced the sounds and activities. Things escalated to a point where no one felt safe, so the landlord called in a reputable paranormal team, various priests, and several types of psychics and mediums. We began to hear babies or children crying, babies or children laughing, grunting, and animalistic sounds, as well as a woman's voice. I can't explain how terrifying her voice was, but it was definitely not just a human who had passed away. The voice was incredibly loud, and every time it spoke, all it would ever say was, "Hello, hello," until we left or asked it to leave us alone. It was mechanical and otherworldly. Other noises were typically wavering or wafting through the house or rooms. At times, the noises could even be heard from outside. The consensus was that it was no longer feasible to live in the house due to the frequency and severity of the activity. Nobody was sleeping, and the constant power surges and outages made it dangerous. It was eventually determined that the spirit was not the woman who had lived there and died. I talked to the neighbors a few times too, who claimed there was a lot of activity on that street due to a violent death. It later came out that prior renters had taunted or tried to provoke activity against the landlord's rules. The landlord decided to sell the house. The house didn't sell for years, but when it finally did, whoever brought it painted it completely black, except the door, which remained red. It was a morning like any other. My parents were out at their respective jobs, and my brother, who was 4 years older than me, and I were home alone, as we went to school in the afternoon. During the mornings, we stayed together until my mum came home at noon. I was in the living room playing with my toys, while my brother was in the kitchen making himself a snack. Everything seemed peaceful. The front door and the garage gate were securely closed, and nothing unusual was happening. The living room has a window overlooking the garage, and the kitchen has 3 doors, one of which also opens to the garage. My brother and I were absorbed in our activities when something very strange happened. Out of nowhere, we both heard a loud noise of footsteps coming from the garage, as if it was someone running very fast with heavy footsteps. The sound reverberated through both rooms. At that moment, we thought it might be one of our friends, as they often entered the house unnoticed. Thinking it was my friend, I shouted, "Rick!" At the same time, my brother yelled his friend's name, "Liam?" But there was no reply. I I ran to the kitchen to check what was happening and asked my brother if he'd seen anyone through the kitchen door. He said he did. I asked him what it was, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he began searching the entire yard for whatever it was, and in the end he found nothing. After his unsuccessful search, I asked him again what he had seen. He looked at me with a frightened expression and finally said, "I saw a man wearing black like a shadow. He was much taller than usual and wore something on his head, like an old-style hat. It was scary." Hearing the description, I was petrified. Who or what was the man my brother had seen? Could it have been the spirit of someone who had lived in the house before? Or maybe the famous Luis Grande, the strange man with the dolls, whose story my parents and neighbors used to tell me. I always felt scared hearing those stories at night, imagining his appearance, but could he really exist? I don't know. I only know that we will probably never have answers. That figure that violently ran through the garage that day, so tall and unknown, continues to haunt me. I still feel uneasy whenever I'm alone in my parents' house, fearing that it might return and do more than just run through the garage. After that day, I never saw it, or more accurately, never heard it again, although I witnessed other strange events in the house after that. But I can't say if they were related to that terrifying figure. About 18 years ago, I lived up in a small town in the north of the States, an old 2-story house in the middle of the town, nothing too out of the ordinary. When we first moved in, everything was normal for the most part. A couple of bedrooms upstairs, kitchen and bathroom downstairs, and a large cellar with a giant hatch door in the middle, and a weird crawl space that went under the kitchen. Fast forward a few months and we'd all settled in, and just unexplainable things started happening. It began small, weird sounds with what seemed like no origin, lucid visions in the evening both in and around the property. But as these went on and on with all 4 people in the home, they all became centralized into that crawl space. Most of it involved corpses being stuffed in there, which we had come to think, given the history of the town, was very possible that it was used for just that. Later on came things moving. First thing we noticed was the dining room chairs. All 6 looked like they had been pushed away from the table when we always put them upside down on the table due to dogs jumping up. And then more malicious acts kept happening as well. A couple that stuck out was that we kept feeling like we were being pushed down the cellar stairs. And one other time we were watching TV, my mum had an iron cooling off in the cellar, and we slowly started smelling something burning. And after searching for a few minutes, we found the clothes iron that was turned off, on full power face down on an area rug in the cellar where we had it. In the end, it ended up being one of the main reasons we moved out of that house. We moved out of state and were done with the feeling of an angry spirit in the house. We couldn't find any real history of the house except when it was built, so we don't know if there was any weird stuff that happened there. We just knew that there were far too many encounters for us to shrug off, and that it was time to move on. In Western Kentucky around 2004, I moved into a house, and on the first day, a box of electrical wires and outlets that were a couple of feet away from me rustled, and when I looked down, it did a 90-degree turn. Small paranormal stuff happened a few times a year, but in 2007, we did some work on the bathroom and kitchen area, and it stirred up some wildness. I was standing up one day with my girlfriend sitting on the couch a few feet in front of me. I had M&Ms and playfully lobbed a few her way to tease her. A few bounced off and over her towards the front door and opened to the bedroom. A few seconds after I stopped and we laughed, an M&M flew at me from that area and hit me in the chest, which spooked my girlfriend out big time. I went towards that area with my arms waving around to see if I could feel something, but nothing. No physical being with invisible tech, at least. Another day, within a few months of the M&M incident, I was trying to make my girlfriend and friend laugh at me for being an idiot, and they called the entity a few choice words and dared it to possess me, saying it was a coward, and that it couldn't do jack squat. I mean, it is funny trying to fight a ghost and daring it to possess you. I wasn't being serious. But how would the ghost or whatever know that? After that, there was a negative, heavy feeling in the house. I had my ankle yanked towards the foot of the bed a few times, and the ankle would swell and hurt badly for a few days, once even being yanked hard enough to go to the foot of the bed. Bear in mind I was 250 pounds. I woke up closer to noon, with the covers mostly over my head, hearing one of my cats stand up beside my head where he usually slept, to hiss and growl towards the foot of the bed. Then I noticed the reflection in his eyes was a black mass in the shape of a man wearing a hat. A few years later, I saw on TV that people see and sometimes call him the Hat Man. But of course I thought someone broke in. My girlfriend was at work and it was just me and the cats, so I got the courage real quick, lifted up, ready to lunge if someone was there, but there was nothing. Relieved, I looked at my cat, and there it was in the reflection in his eyes again. This time I looked close, and it wasn't on the outside of the window, as its black mass legs went down to the bedpost, which was lower than the bottom of the window. I couldn't see any details of a person, just a dark mass in the generic shape of a human with a brimmed hat. In 2010, my girlfriend and I broke up, and 3 months later I asked out a lady from St. Louis who was friends with my best friend's girl. And we started dating, taking turns every weekend to visit each other. The 3 times she visited me, the first 2 times we'd hear chains in the kitchen move, or footsteps of a person wearing work boots from the kitchen down the hallway, and I checked each time and no one was there. The 3rd and final weekend, I was using the bathroom, and the bedroom was across the hallway, and we heard footsteps in between us. Just a little bit later while cuddling, the foot of the bed picked up 2 or so feet and slammed back down with both of us on the bed. It wasn't the cats, it wasn't an earthquake, and the end our heads were at didn't sink down or go up. That could have made a wave motion. It was at that moment she told me that if we were going to be more serious, I had to move to the St. Louis area because she could not live in that house, and 2 weeks later, we had a place together across the river from St. Louis. House on Hardmondy Road in Paducah, Kentucky. Screw that house. But maybe I owe whatever was there an apology for getting so negative and cussing it out and daring it a few times. It wasn't hostile until I began to be a butt. I am Canadian, living in Canada. But when I was a child, my family spent 6 years living in a small town in Massachusetts, about an hour outside of Boston. During our time there, we lived in 2 different houses, but the first, where the story takes place, was an older mansion. This was a historic building over 200 years old, and at this point, it had been converted into 4 or 5 separate apartments. We lived in the main/central part of the house. We had 2 floors, with a living room, dining room, and kitchen on the first floor, and 2 bedrooms on the second. My parents had 1 bedroom, and my sister and I shared the other. One weekend, my father had to work on a Saturday, and my mother had some errand or other to do. I was 6 at the time, and my sister 8, so we were too young to be left alone. So Catherine, a family friend's teenage daughter, was babysitting us. I distinctly remember her seeming much older in my memory, but thinking back she was probably only 13 years old. My parents had recently bought me a cheap, cardboard cutout puppet stage set, so I was entertaining my sister Catherine by putting on a puppet show. I had placed the puppet stage on top of a small footstool and placed a child-sized chair next to it, with the blanket draped over the side in order to have a curtain for the puppet stage. I was sitting in the back of the bedroom, in front of the closet, while my sister and Catherine were sitting at the front, by the window, and next to the open door of the hallway landing. They were reacting to my lame puppet show about as well as you can imagine an older sister and a tween would, making fun of my silly, made-up on-the-spot stories. But suddenly they stopped and said they heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Thinking my mum or dad must have come home early, they peeked outside the bedroom door, but no one was there. They pretty quickly rationalized it was an old house, wooden floorboards settling, etc., and sat back down. A moment later, it was as if a sudden gust of wind burst into the room. All of the windows were closed. The footstool that had the puppet stage tripped over by itself, while the chair with the blanket on it rose off the floor by itself, about a foot off the ground, and then fell back to the floor. To this day, I can still remember the eerie feeling of having the wind completely surround me, and a shivering feeling rose up the back of my spine. My sister and Catherine were screaming at this point, and ran downstairs and outside, and I was right behind them. We waited outside the house, unwilling to go in until my parents returned home. This was the only such experience that my sister and I ever had in that house. But years later, when recounting the story to a friend, my mother revealed that, on at least one occasion, when my father would be working a late night, she was reading in bed when their bed just started gliding across the floor by itself. The house was on a fairly large lot and had an old barn that my sister and I would infrequently play in, as it was just so dark and creepy. A co-worker of my father's lived in one of the smaller apartments next to ours, and she had access to the attic from her apartment, so my sister and I got to see it a few times. Apparently, it was the maid's quarter back in the day, and had a very creepy built-in brick oven. One last little odd point I'll throw in is a Mandela effect story. In the years since, I've googled the house and the town many times to see if there were ever any other accounts of ghostly or paranormal stories there, but I never found anything. I even found the house listed on Zillow. The odd thing is the address has changed. The street number has gone down by 2 digits. Myself and my family all remember it being 45, but on Zillow it's now listed as 43. This is over 40 years ago, so it's possible that the address was modified at some point between the years. For context, I'm 16, and have lived in this house for a few years now. This isn't a new house. My dad used to live in it with his parents and sister, and it was given to him. I've had many experiences, but there are only a few that I can recall. Everything started last year. My first encounter happened when I was trying to go to sleep one night. Every time I'd close my eyes, I would hear voices, not in my ear, but almost like it was in my head. The first noise sounded like a woman, and the second sounded like a man. They were making odd noises. I'd had enough because it was disturbing my sleep, so when I turned the light on, it stopped. Another time, my dad was on a work trip, so it was just me and my mum. I was in the kitchen, around 11, making something, and I was watching a movie on my iPad. Beside my kitchen is the laundry room. The door was open, but where I was standing, you could see the attic. Suddenly the lights went off, and from the laundry room, I hear this creepy-ass laugh like from a clown. I ran, touching the walls to my parents' room, which was on the other side of the house, and as soon as I touched my mum, the lights all came back on. These experiences were very on and off and didn't happen often. My dad was away for work a lot. We have a light inside and outside of the house, and my mum always forgets to turn off the one inside. I came out of my room and saw her there doing something. I chatted with her for a moment, then headed back to my room. I was wearing my AirPods, so I didn't hear her leave. She'd gone to the shops, but I didn't know that at the time. A while later, I step out again and saw the light still on through my door, and I called out, "Mum?" There was a pause, and then she replied, "Yeah?" But it didn't sound like her. It sounded like someone trying to imitate her voice. I wasn't scared. I'm not the type to freak out over stuff like that, and I refused to give in to the fear. I checked the bathroom and no one was there. I walked to the front door, looked outside, and the car was gone. So I just sat in the lounge and waited for her to come home. That's just one of my recent occurrences. A few weeks ago, I had a dream about a spider crawling across me. I tried brushing it off in the dream, but I could feel it on my skin. I shot awake, still brushing at myself, still feeling the sensation. Nothing was there, so I went back to sleep. The next morning, while getting ready for school, I noticed a small spider creeping across my floor. I squashed it with no hesitation. Then a few nights ago, I was lying in bed around 3 a.m. almost asleep. My shirt didn't cover my upper back, when suddenly I felt someone blowing on me. I told myself it wasn't real, but the feeling kept coming. Shivers shot through my entire body like small electric shocks. My fan was running sure, but it always is, and it's never felt like this. I got annoyed and tugged the duvet over my back to block whatever it was. Then the blowing shifted to my cheek. This time it was warm, close, like someone's face hovering right next to mine. It didn't stop until I rolled onto my back and opened my eyes. Then nothing, and everything went still again. My old house had a kitchen and back room that always felt really creepy to me as a kid, and I would feel a bad, shadowy figure following me around. I would feel like I was being watched as soon as I stepped into the kitchen and felt my fight or flight response become activated. There was a glass door attached to the kitchen that went out to our backyard, and occasionally I would be able to see the figure right behind me in the reflection. There were also moments when the air around me would suddenly become ice cold, or we would hear footsteps in our attic, which we never even went in. It got to a point where I would not go into the kitchen or back room of the house alone, especially at night. Other people also felt terrified without even me telling them how I felt. Once I was in the back room with my friend, and she suddenly broke down and told me she couldn't be in there anymore, and that she wanted to go in the living room instead. Another friend told me that she woke up once at my house really dehydrated, but couldn't bring herself to go past the threshold to the kitchen. Then we decided to fix a door to my bedroom, and the repairman pointed out that someone had previously been deadbolted in my bedroom from the outside. About a few years later, my mum decided to tear down the house, and they found a bag of cremated remains inside my walls. A few years after that, my mum and I were in the car talking about construction, and she asked me if I wanted to know the real reason she decided that we should tear down the house and not just remodel. Keep in mind, I never told anyone or anybody about the shadowy figure or horrible feeling I got in the kitchen and back room. She proceeded to tell me about how she saw this dark figure and felt an evil presence inside the kitchen and back room, about how she had to go get our pastor at the time involved, and they did this whole thing where they announced that our house and the people in it belonged to Jesus. Looking back at it now, I just want to share this story, and if anyone has had anything like this happen to them, I hope I can help in some way.